You were at the airport, you decided to go back and kind of delay this $19 billion relief package. Why?
Sure. Well, I start with the premise that I believe, as I think most people that I represent and most Americans believe, that the House of Representatives, the People's House, is full of representatives who should be voting and representing us by voting. Sure, there are moments where you can agree to something by consent, setting a time for a vote and things to keep things moving. But when you're talking about $19 billion not paid for, that was passed Thursday afternoon, we should have been there. We should have taken the bill from the Senate, and then we should have voted.
And so was this more of a process decision from you versus actually on the $19 billion?
Yes and no, right? Process and substance go hand in hand. It's $19 billion. That's about 1.4% of our discretionary spending. That is a lot of money. We should vote on that. So that is both procedural and substantive. I'm also concerned that it's not paid for, but we can vote on it, and those who aren't concerned about that can vote for it. I won't vote for it because I think it should be paid for.
There will be people who have been through these natural disasters and say, I don't care if it's a voice vote or a roll call vote. We want the money as fast as possible. What do you say to folks like that?
I understand why people would think that, but remember that our job is to have a long view about what's important for the health and well-being of the United States. And for me, having a pro forma session, that's not a real session, of the House of Representatives, meet and have 2 members vote to pass something without members being there is not the way that we are doing our duty to protect the American people and make sure that we're representing them well.
So why not make that point on a smaller, less waited for bill?
This was in the news because it was $19 billion. That's the point. It wasn't about making the point for a political purpose. It was that we shouldn't do it.
Why shouldn't we do it? Because I feel like when someone looks at the role of the federal government, the checkbook to recover from natural disasters falls under that thing that they should do.
Is it the federal government's job to manage and deal with some of the disasters we're facing? Of course there's a role for the federal government in that. We've got the Army Corps of Engineers. We've got, we got to build roads where we've got a federal nexus with that. We've got ports. We've got to go down a laundry list of things where the federal government has a very important role in that. And I think this bill, by the way, has improved somewhat. That's good. But it's still $19 billion that we have not had the opportunity to fully debate and have a discussion on and decide whether it should be paid for.
But you said you're going to vote against the bill on this, right?
If it is not paid for on Monday, which I assume at this point it won't be, and if we're not also simultaneously moving legislation that will help deal with the crisis at our border, I can't in good conscience support the legislation that's currently drafted.
What do you mean paid for? What would have to happen for you to get your vote?
You can go through and find other areas of government to cut or reform so that you can find a way to pay for it. There's dollars sitting at FEMA now. I think there's about $29 to $30 billion sitting at FEMA. Some of it's obligated through the end of the year. We could rejigger some of those dollars to free some of that up to pay for it. There are a lot of different mechanisms to go down and choose to do it, but here's the thing. We're racking up $100 million of debt per hour. So while we're sitting here and having this interview over time and getting set up, we got $100 million over an hour. $2.4 billion per day. $24 billion on the 10-day recess while the House was adjourned for their Memorial Day recess. That's all debt that we're going to rack up, even if we don't pass that additional $19 billion.
Somebody will look at that answer and could say, well, weren't the tax cuts a major driver of the debts? And the only thing that changed is that Democrats are now in charge of the House.
The question about tax cuts and pay-fors is a different thought than when you're talking about having spending and whether you pay for spending, right? When you look at your budget at home, you've got your income, you look at your income, and then you figure out what you can pay for. When we talk about tax cuts, we're really talking about how we're creating economic growth and what our future revenue looks like. We can debate whether some of that produces more revenue or less, but it's still the people's money. And that's what always gets lost in this, taking people's money to go spend for government. Okay, I believe leaving more money in the pockets of the American people creates wealth, creates jobs, creates opportunity, and ultimately does create more revenue to the Treasury because we have economic growth.
Yeah. But if you have a problem with the debt, isn't there a different thing you could kind of make that point on, and then as opposed to disaster relief?
I think we should be making the point every day, and I'm trying to do that.